Welcome. This is Kim Ades from Frame of Mind Coaching, and I am the host of Resilience Radio, where I interview professionals who are experts at crushing the tough stuff. Before I interview my guest and before I bring him onto the line with me, I've been asked a question or two about journaling. A lot of people say, what exactly should I be journaling about? And I decided that in addition to this podcast and interviewing my guest, I would supply you with a journaling question at the beginning of every interview. So today, my journaling question is the following. What do you really, really want more than anything? And I use two reallys because I want you to think about what you truly deeply want, not what somebody else wants for you, not what's expected of you, but what does your heart deeply, deeply want? And then the second question, in combination with the first one, is what is stopping you from having that right now? So that's your journaling question, your prompt for the day. And if you're super, super courageous, what I'd like for you to do is actually email me your response in journal format. So send it to kim@frameofmindcoaching.com and you will receive a response to your journal. So go for it. Today, I'd like to welcome a gentleman that I met at a speaking event for tech that I did not too long ago. His name is Bradley Bradkin. Bradley, are you here?
I am.
Welcome.
Thank you very much, Kim. Nice to be here.
So I discovered about 3 minutes ago that Bradley actually lives very close to me, like maybe, I don't know, 5-10 streets over. Yeah. And usually I interview people from anywhere but close to me. So it's pretty exciting. We share the same community, and I'm really, really thrilled to have you on the line. So welcome.
Thank you again. Like I said.
So you run a company called HighVail.
Yeah. HighVail Systems, yes.
HighVail Systems. What is HighVail? What do you do? How long have you been doing it for? And just share with us a little bit of the basics of your company.
So HighVail is what we refer to in today's world. We're in the technology business, in the resale and services business around computer systems. So really the background and the industry that we play in is what we refer to as system integration. So they call us a regional system integrator because we are in Toronto and really service Ontario, a little bit outside of Ontario, whether it's east or west, but for the most part, our business is localized. And what we do is we put in today's world, I like to say we build clouds, but that's becoming a little bit overused as a term. But ultimately, the name HighVail comes from high availability. So our strength is in building highly resilient and highly available infrastructures to run some of the most complex applications in a variety of different industries, primarily around financial services, but we do business within the public sector, so healthcare, police forces, et cetera, all around really solutions that provide our customers with more resilient infrastructure to really provide them with what they need today to drive their business forward. So
give me an example of a client you might have. Like, just give me one example.
I'll give you my biggest client. So, actually, I'll give you another one. So my biggest client is in financial services.
Okay.
But I'll start off with another one that's in healthcare.
Okay.
It's actually a government agency. And one of the things that we did for them was to help them containerize. So that may not make a lot of sense to people here, but what containers are is a way to take older applications or applications that have been running in a legacy type environment where it's really, we refer to it as client server. So the client being your desktop or your phone or whatever it is that then interacts with some kind of a system or some kind of an application that sits in a data center. In their case, they wanted to take that application and actually put it onto tablets that nurses in the hospitals now can access that information directly from the tablet. So no longer requiring them to walk around the hospitals with clipboards with all kinds of information within the chart. Everything sits there.
I see.
Yeah, so what we did is we containerized an existing application. It's called Panorama. It's been around for several years. It runs on a fairly resilient backend that is really not something that we would put in today, but it is something that was built, it's over 10 years ago today. But the application itself, in order to do this, they needed to take it, containerize it, and then ensure that it could be run in this more cloud-enabled environment versus having to continuously access. So a lot of what happens on the tablet versus having to go back and forth from the system.
So I imagine that you have certain things that you have to pay attention to, like security, practicality, ease of use, and this whole idea of it being accessible to people and the data being relevant in the moment.
Exactly. So all of those things, all in real time and all continuously available.
Okay, very interesting. So that helped me understand what you do way better. We're all maybe technically savvy to some degree, but you're obviously ahead of the curve for us. So I try to make it easy for everybody to understand what you do. So you have how many employees at this point?
So at this time, we've got 39, 40, something like that. We're not quite sure.
Okay.
We have a couple of part-time people.
And what would you say at this point is a challenge for you, as maybe you're continuing to grow, or maybe you've grown to a place where you're content with? What is the challenge you feel? You've been at this for a while. You're at a different phase. You're not a startup. What is the thing that you find yourself struggling with?
So it's similar to what I saw my superiors struggle with when I worked for other companies. So we started the company 15 years ago. May 1st actually was our 15th anniversary. And prior to that, for 17 years prior to that, I worked for other businesses in a similar kind of, in the same industry, but that did similar things to what we do today at HighVail.
Okay.
And I saw the same struggles there as we're seeing today, which relates back to growth as we bring on new people, integrating cultures, behaviors, really trying to make an environment, and especially in today's world with sort of the millennial approach of a job is not for life anymore, a job is for a couple of years and then you should really move on. We're trying to break that mold and really bring people on that are looking for something that has more depth to it and more longevity to it for them.
So how do you address that issue if they're coming in saying, hey, I'm good to be here for a year, 2 years, maximum 3? Yeah. How do you change their thinking from that type of approach to having them look at your company as much more of a long-term endeavor? So
first of all, where many companies may take the personal aspect out, we actually add it back in. So it's very important for us to not only know our people, but actually know about their lives and know what makes them tick as much as possible. So we have a number of things that we do around behavioral, I don't know what to call it, I guess behavioral traits and other things that we go through when we put them through when we go through the interview process, and then once they've started.
Like assessments?
It's not really direct assessments. It's more just behaviors and attitudes. We have values. We have we've identified core values for the company, and we link those values to, or we link their behaviors to the values, so that we can, ensure that when we hire somebody on, they have the same values, or at least can live those same values.
Right.
And one of them is about, not about longevity, but more about dedication and really feeling, that the company is your own. It's not just, you're not just working for somebody, you're part of a much bigger family. And I do see the company very much. So
how do you screen for that? That's a very interesting question. How do you screen? Are there specific questions you ask? Are you looking for something historically, like, in their past? Like, what if you're hiring a millennial who doesn't have perhaps years and years and years of experience to draw upon? How do you screen for dedication?
So it's really through a series of questions. So actually, I'll take a 2-year step back. When we went through the values process, the firm that I used to help me define those values, it was a father and his son. They went through a little bit of a change themselves last year, and as a result, Gil, who's the son of the guy that I had engaged to do the project with us, basically became available and was actually looking for something that had more stability to it instead of continuing to be a consultant. And it worked out well because his dad was going through a small change in his practice.
Okay.
When we did that, I realized that Gil kind of got it. He understood it. And like I said, about 9 months ago, 10 months ago, I realized as the company grows, I need to bring on somebody who has more experience with human resources. And Gil has an MBA in both organizational behavior, but has worked in this area.
Yeah.
And we started off with him being on a contract to the company, and about 6 months ago, he came on full time. 5 months ago, I think now.
Okay.
Full time. And really what that did for us is that it allowed us to not just talk about the values, but actually map those to behavioral questions that we can then use as part of our interview process.
Okay, so this is very important. I want to just pause here because for those of you who are listening, a huge thing that I encounter with many of my clients is how do I hire the right person? And there's a book I recommend that everybody read. It's called The Who Method. It's an amazing book. I'm sure perhaps you've been exposed to it. But this whole idea of identifying your values and then asking not just one, but a series of questions that help you draw out whether or not these people match those values is very, very important. Very important. So, and just to play around, if we look at the value of dedication, can you give us one example of a question you might ask to draw out that value?
Well, and again, it comes down to, we'll ask them a question, very open-ended question, depending upon how much experience, as you said, because sometimes there's millennials that have not had a lot of work experience or have only worked little projects or little contracts, so to speak.
Yep.
But we'll ask them questions about collaboration, as an example, and supporting their peers, supporting their fellow employees, and how they might go about that. So, we'll pinpoint something that might be relevant to their job, will be relevant to their job. And then we'll focus in on that and ask some questions, frame those questions around that. I'm sitting at my desk with earphones on. If I was able to bring out the manual, I could sort of quote you some of the questions.
Right.
It's really straightforward. It really is just asking questions that are, and we're in a sales role here, in a sales business here, but they're asking leading questions. That's really what it is, and trying to lead them down a path to see what their responses are. And with those responses, that may lead to one question or another, depending upon which way it goes. You
were mentioning the idea of asking leading questions. Are you looking for a specific answer or, interesting. Usually we don't want to lead in interview. Usually we want to ask totally open-ended questions so we're not getting a very specific response so that the interviewee just goes wherever he or she goes.
Well, so at the beginning of the interview, so there's multiple steps within the interview. This is not part of the first interview. I can promise you that.
Okay.
Something that comes later on, and it actually doesn't come from the individual that might be their direct manager. It can come from either my HR person or somebody else, or maybe one of their peers that they might be working with. So at the end of the day, really what we're trying to do is to draw out, and I understand what you're saying, you don't want to be posing leading questions, but at the same time, we want to see how they're going to react to our environment, because our environment, any company, any business owner could say that their environment is very different, but we do know that we've created this unique environment because that is what our people tell us. Many of them have worked, we have some people that have worked, for companies sometimes for 6, 8, 10 years in length, left those companies to come work for us, because what they found is, whether it's somebody that works for one of our suppliers, potentially a competitor, as they interacted with our business, with our people, what they found was an environment that was much more welcoming and much more open-minded. We don't legislate people to, I hate to use the word legislate, but it's the only word I think I can think of right now. We don't legislate people to do specific things. We give them tasks, but we also give people a lot of freedom around that. We give them a lot of autonomy. If they abuse that freedom and that autonomy, frankly, they're probably not going to be with the company for very long.
Do you think that a lot of people work well in autonomous environments? And I'm asking because I encourage my clients to create independence, right? To allow their team members to rise to the occasion. But every once in a while, we see some individuals who completely flounder in that open setting. What's your experience with that?
We've had some turnover over the last year and a half as a result of that.
Mm-hmm.
So where we found people that we need and wanted and should have been able to be autonomous that need too much structure. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I'm thinking about something right now that falls in with one of my senior leadership team where, some individuals just need everything properly and clearly defined. That's not really the culture that we try and foster here at HighVail.
So what do you do when there's somebody who needs that level of structure? Do you say, never mind, you're not a good fit? Or do you have some of your leaders who provide structure while you spend your time maybe on the bigger picture?
Well, so the answer to that is twofold. The first one is we try and help them and coach them to give them a little bit more comfort. Yeah. But if that doesn't work, and we actually had one person that left us, I guess about 3 or 4 months ago now, who sort of wanted that. When I say sort of, that was the way that they expressed their feelings, is that they wanted that autonomy. And from the moment that they were given that autonomy, they began abusing it. And we tried to coach them differently, and they failed. They totally failed. They couldn't operate. And in fact, became more of a problem, what we can refer to in certain cases a virus, as a result of that. Because the blame was always thrown back at leadership for not giving her the proper guidance, when in reality, we gave her guidance, we gave her what she needed to get the job done. Yeah. And she was not able to operate autonomously. Just didn't work. Period.
It's very interesting because I find that a lot of, not millennials necessarily, but young people want autonomy. They want to rise to leadership positions, and they look to their leaders for guidance. And there's a bit of a clash there, right? There's a big clash because leaders don't look to others for guidance. Leaders just take a risk. They just take the bull by the reins. Was that the expression? They just the bull by the horns, and then they just go. And what I find is that they want this mix of guidance plus freedom, and it's a bit of a clash for everybody involved.
I would fully agree with that.
Yeah.
And when that happens, and as I said, we've had some change over the last year and a half, maybe even as much as 2 years actually, that came as a result of that. We hired somebody. I'll give you another example. We hired somebody. It's probably more than 2 years because he's been gone now for 2 years. But we hired somebody on into a leadership role, and it turns out, and this was before I went through, and this actually is what led me towards this these values and then behavioral exercise, was the experience that I had with this individual. And they were brought on in a senior position, or what should have been a senior position, but had absolutely no clue how to operate in that role.
Yeah.
We gave him guidance. He didn't just flounder, he actually resisted.
Yeah. So, and I want to pause for a minute because I think this is very important. What we see is that a lot of people struggle or they fail when their thinking isn't aligned with their role and their goals. Mm-hmm. And so if there's someone who's invited to step into a senior position, but actually has never operated as a senior person or cannot imagine themselves that way, they don't know how to play that out. And so there's a gap that exists between their self-perception and the requirements of the role. We see that over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I've seen it myself from people that I've worked for over the years that were given the responsibilities, but ultimately just couldn't handle it. Weren't capable at all to handle it.
So you have a very interesting story. You were working for a company for quite a long time, and at some point, something happened, but you were let go. Can you tell us that story?
Well, I think the story is it's a fairly simple one, and I'm sure I'm not the first one that this has happened to, but I went to work for a company. They hired me. I was recommended by a mutual customer, and I was the right person for them to hire for the job. And part of my role is when I was still living in Montreal, and part of my role was to build the business for them in that region, but also to hire on people. And very early on in my tenure sort of with them, I I realized that I probably needed some training to help me be a people manager, because I'd never managed people outside of in a retail environment. When that happened, that started to create friction between myself and one of the owners of the company. What I came to realize is that he himself did not have any experience nor any training to lead, but he owned half the company, and he had earned that through his sales skill. He was a very good salesman. And ultimately, his management style and his management skill was very, very weak. They went, or he and his partner agreed that they would go and hire, in fact, a behavioral psychologist to help them begin to put together behavioral profiles of the various employees in the company, so that we could have, be put into positions where we did have the opportunity to grow and to evolve into something that was more. But in parallel to that, he kept on putting people into leadership positions, management and directorial positions, that also had no training, but were very good yes men for him. In the interim, I was moved from Montreal to Toronto because the largest customer that I did business with was actually based in Toronto, so it made more sense for me to be here. But it was a very, it was not a pleasant experience, the move itself. But we went through it. My wife and I, our kids were young at the time, and it made a lot of sense for us to make that move. So we did, and came to Toronto, and the first 3 or so years were very, very difficult for us. And then the next year after that was even more complicated, because I could see that the end was near for me in the company. Right. And it wasn't near for me because I wasn't doing something right. It was near for me because this owner just did not feel comfortable in keeping me on, because I wouldn't say yes to everything that he needed me or wanted me to say yes to.
So you clashed with them? Clashed
a lot.
So when they let you go, I mean, how did you react? How did you respond? What did you do next?
So I knew it was coming, because the day before I had I had confronted the individual, and my reaction was a very simple one, because when they decided to let me go, he didn't have the courage to do it himself. He sent one of his henchmen in. I like to call him a henchman, again, an individual that just had no experience in management. Mm-hmm. And the settlement that they offered me was, as the lawyer that I spoke to afterwards said, an employee at McDonald's would be treated better than the way that they treated me.
Wow.
So that added fuel to my fire, so to speak. But the first couple of weeks were very tough for me. The reaction that I had was, I'd never been let go from a job. Mm-hmm. I had never been in this kind of a situation before, and I had a wife and kids that I had to support, and they held back monies that they owed me. So
were you angry? Were you?
I was beyond angry. I wanted vengeance. Mm-hmm. I wanted to get back at them. So the good news is the company's about to go bankrupt. Only took 15 years, but doesn't really matter. But the individual as well that basically treated me the way that he did, his partner threw him out a couple of years ago as well. So ultimately, I was angry about it, but my vengeance, so to speak, or how I wanted to get back at them, was to prove to them not only that they were wrong in what they did, but that I could really not only come out of this stronger, but come out of this in a way that was more in line with my own feelings, my own abilities.
Right. So this is what we call a high degree of emotional resilience, that when someone experiences adversity, that they are able to bounce back from that adversity, not only with speed and agility, but they're able to somehow leverage that adversity. And that's what you're describing. Yeah. Before we move on, I want to talk a little bit for a second about this whole idea of vengeance. Is anger, is the desire for vengeance a terrible, horrible, awful thing? Well, we don't want to stay in that state, right? Like, we don't want you to live your whole life thinking of getting back at them, because then they're taking a lot of your energy and they're taking a lot of your power. And really, there are so many better things that you could spend your time and energy focused on, right? So we don't want you to stay there a whole long time. But vengeance can be a bit of a catalyst, and it could take you from completely despondent and hopeless to a state of action. So it's not always terrible, as long as that's not the place you end or stay stuck at for a very long. It can mobilize you and take you to a place of really figuring out a plan and executing something that could be very useful for you. And it sounds like that's exactly what you did.
Very much so. And in
Very
fact,
much so.
but I am also an individual who thrives and performs best under, I'm going to say, under pressure, with some stress in my life. That's just my style of action, how I perform best.
You're not that unusual. A lot of entrepreneurs who are, highly driven, tend to create, even unconsciously, a lot of situations that push them through time crunches, but stressful situations. Okay, so as we're rounding the corner of this interview, I have one final question for you, Bradley. You have a coach on the line. Is there a question that you have for this particular coach?
Coaching individuals within the organization at all levels is often, a complicated thing. Different ways of thinking, different ways of doing things. And, I'm curious how you would address something if you had, a couple of individuals that really need to work together, on a regular basis, need to collaborate, but their viewpoints are often very opposed. And, the friction that can often create, it doesn't contribute to a collaborative environment, which is really what we're trying to obviously move forward on in all ways.
So that's actually a great question, because I have found that a lot of times leaders find themselves in a situation where they have two key players who are at each other, and who can't find a way to come to common ground. And their instinct, the leader's instinct, is to step in and try to mediate. And I always suggest that they don't do that. So don't get in the middle, don't mediate, don't bring them together in a room and facilitate a conversation. Rather than doing that, actually coach each of them separately. And the way you coach them is by helping them understand, number one, what their goal is, and showing them that their approach isn't helping them reach their goal. The other thing that's very important is to help them understand what their beliefs are about the other person. Like, what is the goal of the other person? What do you think they're trying to achieve? And show them that probably, in all likelihood, their interests are very common and the same. And so what I would do from there is coach each of them separately to kind of see where the other person is coming from, see what the goals of the other person are, and understand what kind of approach they need in order to help the other person drive together, right, to get to the same destination. So to work collaboratively. But you don't want to do that when they're in the room together, then they'll both feel under attack. But if you take one person in the room and say, I understand that this is what you want to achieve, and your approach is actually making it harder to get there. So you're assuming positive intent, and then you're demonstrating how their behavior or their approach is slowing them down and the company down. And then the next step is to show them how to work with this other person by assuming positive intent and helping them get to where they need to go. So the idea is coach them separately. So just like as you would have two kids who are fighting, mm-hmm. you don't have a three-way conversation, because then you get, well, he said this and she said that and you're blaming me and on and on and on. You don't want to do that. You want to take the kid aside and say, hey, what is it that you want to achieve? You want to achieve this? Great. Let me help you get it. Here's how to work with your sister in order to get to where you need to go. But understand that what your sister wants is also valuable and needs to be taken into consideration too. So do you see the difference right there?
I do. I definitely do. And I really, I appreciate that advice, because, oftentimes, as you said, you have a tendency to try and bring people together and mediate it. Some people are non-confrontational. Others are more confrontational. And oftentimes that's an easier way for them to accomplish or reach their goals. But in many cases, where you'll have that conflict, you'll have two individuals, as I said, that are very different, including one being perhaps very non-confrontational. And I can see why bringing them together wouldn't work.
Well, the other piece of it is that when you take the time to truly understand where someone's coming from and what it is that they want to achieve, and demonstrate that you want to help them achieve what they're looking to achieve, now they're open to your coaching. But when you bring two people in a room, they will never experience that understanding on your part. That just won't happen. It's a struggle. So you definitely need to demonstrate your understanding and demonstrate that you're behind them and you want to help them achieve their goals, and remove the desire to help them from the actual strategy that's on the table, right? So those are two separate things.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Kim. I really appreciate that.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for being on this show with us and sharing your story and talking to our audience. I really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity, and I hope people gained a little bit of insight, and very, very happy that you asked me to participate. Thank you.